and just get ready. We're going to have the first conference with Brian MacKay and Talbot Sweetapple. So we're just a little bit late, and we would like to introduce the 5 award winners for this selection. So we have, first of all, Brian MacKay-Lyons and Talbot Sweetapple. He studied in Halifax and in California with Charles Moore. And by the way, we will have Mr. Sweetapple, who was born in Newfoundland. This is very moving in France. There are maybe people from Normandy or Brittany in this room. He studied philosophy at the University of Dalhousie and architecture at the TUNS. So what's very important is economics. This is imperative, and the place is also very important. You will discover this place. It's extraordinary. These are the coasts of Newfoundland in Canada, their climate, their topography, and their material structures. We are in the presence of 2 architects. For them, architecture and agriculture are indeed intertwined. They are 2 ways of cultivating the earth. For MacKay-Lyons, architecture is not a question of shapes or methods, but a tangible culture for the construction and the shaping of the place. It will take into account not just the place, but also its history and its former settlements and uses by human beings. And we would also like to welcome 2 great lecturers, and I would like to talk about their educational experience. The experience of Brian MacKay-Lyons from 1994 to 2013. He turned his own family farm into an experimental lab called the Ghost Architectural Laboratory. He organized summer workshops, allowing students to learn by doing, to learn directly by doing. And this is a construction pedagogy that has become very important today. And it is based on 2 experiences. We have the Rural Studio, whom we welcomed in 2008, and we have the Coast Agricultural Laboratory, and we're very happy to welcome them and welcome their representatives today. And I would like to welcome this team today.
Feel like a school teacher here. So thank you so much, Marie-Hélène, and the Global Award jury, of course, for this great honor. We're always looking for an idea that ties everything together for your whole career, but also for the moment. So this book has just come out. Called Economy as Ethics. So the idea of economy is the theme here of our talk, written by Robert McCarter, an American architectural historian. So what do we mean by economy? I thought this was an opportunity to connect the idea of sustainability in all of its meanings, perhaps. So for us, economy has 4 aspects. An ethical aspect, you could say about clarity, about simplicity, purity, modesty, honesty, these words, the ethical dimension. And of course, the ecological dimension, because eco, the root is the same for economy and ecology, really about sustainability in a way which is not greenwashing. Our friend Glenn Murcutt is always very angry at the greenwashing shtick that you see so much today. So it's about strategic use of resources, both natural and cultural skills. Excuse me. A third meaning of economy for us is accessibility, which is the dollars and cents part. How do you make architecture which is affordable? Its social dimension. How much architecture is enough architecture? This house that you see here, this little house, is called Enough House, making that question. And the 4th aspect, which is important to talk about and is often missing in the discussion of sustainability, is the aesthetic dimension, with a capital A. In all fields of human endeavor, the idea of elegance or economy is a universal value. Minimum Through the minimum, we get to the timeless, the archetypal, the universal, and ultimately are searching for the sublime through the simplicity. So, I've never used a computer, ever. That's honest. So Maria Lynn mentioned the GHOST Lab, which is an important laboratory for our practice, and it seems like all of the books about our practice have the GHOST projects on the cover. So GHOST has been an important vehicle for our learning and our teaching. And at the GHOST, the final GHOST was in 2011. Which produced this book called Local Architecture. So it was a kind of a community of locavore architects who are interested in place. And of course, many of the laureates from this global award, like Ted Flato or Andrew Freer, the Rural Studio, or Francis Carré from Burkina Faso, were part of this conference. So, as a teacher practitioner, you need a curriculum for your practice, for your teaching. So the curriculum, in a way, we came for this conference with was 3 courses in a one-room schoolhouse: place, craft, and community. And those 3 aspects of architecture we think are connected to the 3 faces of the architect: the artist, the artisan, and the activist. So this happened on our farm. And this farm, I should say, is an act of will. I'm going to talk a lot about listening and also willing. Giancarlo De Carlo, who was my teacher, I worked for him for a while, a Team 10 architect, Italian architect, said, you know, to serve is not to be a servant. Listening is not enough. So this landscape I cleared myself over 25 years from forest, which is why I walk funny now. Yesterday, we went to the Kay Brownlee to see the exhibition about Picasso and primitive art. And I've always felt that all culture derives from the poor. It's a source of, grassroots sorts of culture, which is made very clear in the work of Picasso, of course. So, place, craft, and community. Place for us has 3 aspects. It's about landscape, it's about climate, and it's about material culture. So you have to learn someplace, so you learn at home. We learn our manners at home at the dinner table, right, with our parents. So this landscape that my family have lived in for something like 12,000 years is a place which is all about the ocean horizon. So we say our buildings are hung from the horizon, like a clothesline. 7,500 kilometers of coastline in Nova Scotia, so you always see it. We're interested in urbanity. Urbanism is the greenest thing you can do. So we look to the vernacular for this. Climate. This is our farm, and picture my daughter took in February this year of our Highland cattle. So you know we're from Canada. We have a lousy climate, terrible climate. So the idea of climate is a very important form giver in architecture, so much so that when Glenn Murcutt designed this Arthur Boyd Center in Australia, he told me he'd never made an elevation drawing. It was never drawn in elevation. It's an elevation, not about elevation, but about light, about dealing with west light in Australia. In our climate, we make buildings like this because we have 265 freeze-thaw cycles every year. So we make buildings that are very tight, very minimum, but very thin. Thin because they're made by shipbuilders out of wood. 150 years ago, half of all the ships in the world were built in Nova Scotia. So we think about buildings like ships that are movable, light. We've always been interested in, as a student, I remember reading Rudovsky's book, Architecture Without Architects. And it made a big impression because I was a hick and I thought, well, okay, there's hope for me. So we've always been interested in the idea of cultural genius, which is much more powerful than any individual genius. Cultural genius. So when you look at a Newfoundland trigger mitten, you know Talbot could tell you exactly what village in Newfoundland it comes from because it's a farmer or a fisherman or a hunter, the mitten, or the chair that comes from the wood that grows up behind the house. So we have made a kind of lifelong study about place, going to the Dogon to learn about minimum. What is the minimum house? Quick sketch. What is the minimum public building? In economy, our idea of beauty is more like this. We think, this is Ted Flato's work, who was a laureate of the Global Award a few years ago. It's a West Texas barn made out of recycled Texas oil field pipe. So this is a kind of elegance to us. It's kind of the elegance of a peasant. Or you can take Fay Jones' Thorn Crown Chapel in Arkansas, which was made by commandeering a truckload of 2x6 studs that were going to the dump. A cathedral of garbage. Community, of course, is the ultimate purpose of architecture. And of course, learning to work in a participatory, collaborative way is something I learned from DeCarlo, but also from Charles Moore. I'm not sure who this guy is with the hair on the left, but the child architect is me, of course. Just like I was a student of Charles, who was a student of Louis Kahn, Talbot was my student. I don't think I taught him anything in school, but he works in this way also. Here he's designing a library with the community. And we shouldn't have to talk about it. It's like solar, passive solar. It should be like breathing. It should almost not be worth talking about. Of course you work like this because you get so much. Charles Moore used to say, the only truth he found in architecture is that participation always works. He was a great American humanist, a little different from the guy who's running the country now, I would have to say. So the first ghost project, the student sitting on the beam is Talbot Sweetapple, my partner. So we always look to the vernacular, which is the ugly 80% of the world. From a sustainability point of view, we say it's what you do when you can't afford to get it wrong. This is Talbot's refuge at his farm. This is our chicken house at our farm, which my wife Marilyn, who's here, and I lived in for a few years, 3 meters by 4 meters. Live, work, everything. A weather instrument. Again, looking at the vernacular, which is always contemporary, usually a little ugly. We started making very small projects. This was a 30,000 Canadian dollars project, a studio, all about not using the field, which we think in Canada belongs to the public, making a memorial for Canada's most important folk artist, whose house I played in as a child, aggregating these forms to make microclimates, learning from the barnyard, to make our projects. Thinking about the places between, like in music, the places between the notes are as important as the notes themselves. That's why the great blues artists can make one-bar blues and be wonderful, right? Because of the management of the space between. Simple question of making microclimates. Learning from the vernacular, here are the 3 little pigs making courtyards. So you extend the summer, the fall, and the spring. We'd like to make architecture that is invisible. Someone asked me one time after a lecture in San Francisco, what would you like to do in the future that you're not doing now? I said, from a lifestyle point of view, nothing. But from an architecture point of view, I'd like to make buildings that are more invisible but have more to say. Always modesty of learning from the elders. This is a building that fell down. We made another one across the street 15 years later as a tribute. Sometimes we come very close to those vernacular precedents. The partie, of course, a French word, very important word to us. We beat it into the heads of our students. They don't like it. We tell our students that if you can't draw this 3D upside down across the table looking in the eyes of another person, you're never going to drive the bus. You're never going to be the author. So this is the first sketch for a house that I'll show you now. All of these partie sketches start as a study of what exists already, and then they become progressively a proposition of what might be. So that house is that house, an extruded fish shack, which makes a big deal of the place between itself and the land. Seems like a boat. So under is an important idea. This was under for Grandpa, who couldn't climb the stairs anymore, so he could watch his kids playing out of the sun. We do have sun in Canada. You come up into this temple, if you like. Project in Ontario, making a community, an intentional community. And this is a place where the deer are the architects. So you notice, you learn that the deer make the grazing line at 2 meters, and this is creates the architecture of the whole landscape. So our job was really just to reinforce the grazing line. One of Talbot's sketches, rendering. I don't use computer, but others do. Community gable building, the happy students, ghost students. We made this project in 1 week. It was a 19th century barn, moved, rebuilt in a week, and now it's a place for community events. An author said to me the other day, what is the function of this building? I said, there is no function. So it will be very useful. Used for everything, road hockey, weddings, movie night. So these buildings have found their way to our farm, like this early 19th century schoolhouse from my village, where I grew up. Again, this idea of minimum. The aggregation of these experiments over years, making microclimates amongst the ruins, which are 500-year-old ruins. We've just restored the one top right, this ruin. So this is a kind of open-ended strategy for site planning. It's never complete and always complete. One idea that we reject is this idea of tradition versus modernity. Octavio Paz, the great Mexican poet, said, taken alone, tradition stagnates and modernity vaporizes. Taken together, modernity breathes life into tradition, and tradition responds by providing depth and gravity. So this is our idea about this false dichotomy. So we put the 1830 building next to the building from last year, a Corten building called Enough House. So this is like this one, a kind of iconic, pure form on fins above the landscape. The partie, again, how much is enough? It's 65 meters square and sleeps 7. Aggregated, when you take 2 buildings and you make 2 courtyards, it is like 1 and 1 equals 3. It's the first sketch for that one, the partie of that, right? My native friend wrote this essay about this project, about our work, called The Wind and the Moon. So this building is all about the wind and the moon. The moon, of course, it's called the tide house. So 4 times a day you see the tide coming around, wrapping around this house. It's lifted above the ground on fins so that if the tide comes in, the house doesn't wash away. The tide goes under the house. So this is the wind truss, of course. Aggregation, I wish I could say we did this. No, this is a vernacular building. Of course, that's why it's so beautiful in Norway. But we're making a community now in Utah at 9,000 feet, at 3,000 meters, based on making community, making courtyards. They have 20 meters of snow every year, so it has to be accessed from the top, like Santa Claus. Ghost projects on the ruins. First sketch, collaborative working between the engineer, the architects, the students, the builder, the construction documents, the food, the music. So these ghost parties started as a spontaneous party, and then they became, recording artists, thousands of people coming to the sound of the bagpipes. Designed in a week, built in a week. To make a community event. Some lean-to houses, always about the landscape first. This house was built in 2 weeks for 100,000 Canadian dollars. The party again. This is the clients and me the first day on the site together. It's about this idea, this primordial idea about prospect and refuge. The need for both prospect and refuge. Taught to me by a woman who was a client who was sexually abused as a child, so she knew all about that. So this begets that. Pavilion on top of a rock, the ocean horizon, of course, passive solar, we shouldn't have to say it. A community one like that, a library at University of Toronto, usually one material, and it usually has to be a material that can last for 400 years. So this is a copper library produced. This is the sketch at the interview. This is the sketching together with the users to design the project. This is the point in the participatory design process when I was telling the users that they all had the same idea, and they believed me. Social spaces. What comes with the public architecture is a kind of building systems approach, or approach to architecture that's about the trades, the building trades. Now, Talbot, I'd like you to come up and talk about this next project, which is a real test for critical regionalist approach.
Thanks, Brian. I guess to reiterate many of the themes that Brian was talking about, we were given a project to design a Canadian embassy in Bangladesh. And to us, that was kind of the ultimate test. We were doing a lot of work in our local region. So I guess the question was, how do we respond? What's our toolkit like when we go abroad? And we couldn't imagine any place further from Nova Scotia, Canada, than Bangladesh. Here we are in Nova Scotia on the left, and Bangladesh, if you drill a hole straight through the earth, you get to Bangladesh on the other side. We quickly went over, we immersed ourselves, we had to learn about the place really fast. We didn't have option. We quickly learned it's a place with extremes, extreme density, extreme weather with the monsoons, and we had to really get our sort of toolkit filled up quickly with the regional places that we were there. So learning about how they live, this is normal day. The density was really hard to understand quickly, not what we're used to in North America. Land was very precious. Then what came with that is we found elegance in that word with economy also. So these beautiful bridges that were built to deal with the monsoons. We quickly learned that the Ganges produced an amazing culture of brick. Brick also has to do with the idea that you work with your hands. This is a place of people, not a place of machines. We learned fast that the hand built buildings, not machines. So the scale of the brick was important. Our hero, Louis Kahn, did some work there, so we got a lot of hints from our mentor and our hero, Louis Kahn. How the bricks were moved, very important. If you're really interested, type in Dhaka bricklayer, Ganges, YouTube it. It's the most amazing thing you'll see, how they actually move these bricks from the river to the site. How they use concrete. They pour concrete by hand with small tools and actually carry it on their head. And actually, it's an amazing thing to watch them actually pour a building. It's pretty orchestrated. So understanding the labor, understanding the people, understanding construction was very important to us to actually start developing ways of thinking about a building that represents Canada in that culture of Bangladesh. Understanding that there's an industry of rebar. Rebar is needed. They actually strip down tanker ships and remake their steel into rebar to make concrete buildings. Concrete is a great material they use there for seismic reasons. So understanding, also here's bamboo, what they use a lot for construction materials and scaffolding. Here's an example of their phasing approach in Bangladesh. They just build as much as they can, as much as they can afford, and let the rebar stick out, waiting for the next story or two or three. An elegance, again, of form, dealing with the land, dealing with how buildings meet the land. Again, this has a response to the climate, the monsoon, the water. Another thing is the typologies of buildings in Bangladesh was the issue of the courtyard. The courtyard was used for many reasons, for security, for refuge from a dense population, and also weather, again, climate. So this is our building. We ended up making a courtyard. We used brick, and we also used a bit of steel and a bit of glass, I must admit. We're neighbors to the American Embassy, which was actually a fort behind walls. We made our building into a courtyard wall building, which is more appropriate to the culture that is there. Here's a first sketch, or an original sketch, the red being brick, and the green or yellow actually being sort of the more social or public, so-called public places in an embassy. So we're starting to think about community, starting to think about place, starting to think about environments. The actual green or yellow is actually the metal portions of the building that had to dealing with the monsoons in an outdoor environment. First models. Here's an example of how the concrete was poured. The Canadian government insisted hard hats and worker steel-toe boots. Didn't go over well. That's not how they build there. Most of the things that are a result in this building are a result of dealing with the climate or the weather in harmony with how you use the building, of course. So the raised plinth for when the floods, you're actually up in the courtyard. The overhangs to deal with the monsoon. The louvers on the south side dealing with the sun. This is a good photograph as an essay of all the things. You see the drainage, you'll see the grass, the sunshades, the protection from the monsoons as you walk into the embassy. So everything here is kind of a result of dealing with the weather, the climate. To end this little case study on terms of the humanist approach, this is the only, at this time, this was the only embassy in the diplomatic region of Dhaka, Bangladesh, that actually provided cover for potential immigrants to the country. Very Canadian, we were proud of that. Dignified for the people that were there, waiting to see if they were interested in coming to our country. Courtyard on the street. So this was a good case study. We actually used a lot of the thinking, the regional, look to the vernacular, to reiterate a lot of things. Was working in a particular place to actually give meaning and connection to that place. So Brian, you can take over. Thank you.
So back to Nova Scotia. Land as a form giver in architecture. using the energy of the landscape itself to generate the forms. This is a ghost project making 70 square meter dormitories, the kind of collaborative approach to building. The guests, you see, probably recognize Johanni Palasma there with the hammer, Marlon Blackwell. So we always had it's a place for guests to get together, like here. It's the liability shot. The project built in 1 week. Always inventing things inside now. This is a stair, so walking on air a little bit. More landscape-driven forms. First sketch with the client the first day, and then the project. Microclimate making, as demonstrated by Anna there. Passive solar. A cousin, a more recent one of that project, where you see the ocean under the building, the view is withheld. So the choreography of how you get there is a big part of the architecture. You get seasick in this building because you don't see the land. It's an essay in seeing how much you can remove from the primary form without destroying it completely. Party sketch for our studio, where we work in the countryside. The plan party connected to the plan of the building. So for us, the party is literally the project. You build the party, then you have a party, a community event. So this is where we work in the country, always around a big, long communal table. Again, land, form, driving the architecture. These are the hills left by the glaciers in the last ice age. So we build on these hills and learn from the geological time. It's a model that I think Talbot made. The party, the planned party, using Louis Kahn's served and servant approach, using the vernacular. This is the way cheap buildings are built in North America. I'm getting a sign now, I better rush. Another one on a hilltop, courtyard house on a hilltop, the party. Cliff House, a sketch by Talbot. Two Hulls house, all about growing up in shipyards under ships being built. So these 40-foot cantilevers are because of the waves which would take the foundation away. I took Glenn Murcutt to this house. The first thing he said to me when he was in this room is, he said, "Where is south here, Brian?" I said, "Back that way." He walked out. He wouldn't speak to me. Under, again, between the building and the land, framing the landscape. The Godzilla shot. Another ghost project with the students on the ruins, all made out of 2x4s. A wind tube to express what the wind does to it. Another ghost project, party sketch. Ted Flato was a laureate here earlier, worked on this one with us. The 1:50 model, the 1:1 model. Our boathouse, all about the landscape. Cliff House, which is monumentally modest, according to a critic. Very, very cheap building, which is all about making the most of the topography. A house in a stone part of Ontario, a long wall on the cliff over the sea. Ghost project, party sketch, the community party, and of course, the idea that architecture is a team sport. Another house that's all about the place between, made between the pieces, floating above hilltops. 500 feet apart. A third piece, which is like a block of butter. A little live-work house for 165,000 Canadian called the Box House. A sketch on the left in the kitchen with the lady, and then the building. Photographs by her son. Extremely economical. Right? Another box house. Too many projects. The sliding house, an essay on the horizon versus the hill. Searching like a watermelon is the horizon. So prospect and refuge again. Our office in the city. Another 40-foot table. Making a repair of the urban fabric. Another act of will, I guess. Public architecture in the vernacular of office buildings, so very cheap. An art school. When we make a building on a campus, we have to make 2 quadrangles when we add one building. Sketch by Talbot of another university building in Ontario. So light as a form generator for the building. Social agency always. There was no program for this kind of social space. Then we're making urban projects in Halifax now. This is a project in progress. The red lines, of course, are the people. The bar is a stone bar. The yellow ones are chalks that hold it up are Corten steel. Parti again. So this is going to be the end. So we're interested in architecture that's about cultivation rather than about consumption. So there's a picture of 2 elders, Albert in my neighborhood, putting seaweed in the land to leave the world a richer place. Charles Moore, our teacher, our children, a different kind of elder, one with a PhD. So I'd like to think in terms of practice of us as farmers, cultivating. I'd like to think of ourselves as teachers, like the village priest. Keeping the lamp lit becomes especially important in the face of often disappointing reality. So it's a combination of both listening and willing. And there's a kind of utopian dimension to what we do, which drives us. In one way that becomes clear is that we don't make a distinction between family, community, teaching, and practice. It's all one project. As Alvar Aalto said, all of architecture is a search for paradise on earth. Thank you.